Okay, hello, welcome back, guys. So we are on chapter 7, and like always, let's just dive straight in. This chapter, one of my favorites, Scott. You've titled it "As Above, So Below," and really, what we're talking about is the fine tuning that's apparent in reality. And you're starting with like the highest scale, the universe itself, aren't you? And you bring us down through all the scales down to the atomic level, and we kind of just sort of walk through this incredible realization that, like, for the universe to be just the way it is, it's like unbelievably like particular and exact and specific in terms of all of these constants that need to be exactly the way they are. And if they were even just a tiny little bit out, then none of this, you, me, the whole dance, wouldn't even be here. Isn't that right?
That's right. And so this is a problem in a way that physicists have identified in the last 20 years or so. And yeah, it can be kind of vexing to try to figure out for the dominant paradigm how it is that we get this universe that we have, that's so finely tuned. And usually the explanation is they refer to the multiverse, which we talked about last time. And I think it's sort of,
we don't really buy that.
It's kind of a cop out to say that, well, we're in the one good universe that supports life. And well, there must be an infinite millions of other universes, or maybe infinite number of universes that don't do that. And so the only reason we're having this conversation is because we're in the one good universe. And so I call that winning the cosmic lottery. You know, we've won the cosmic lottery like to such an incredible level that I think it's worthy of kind of re-examining our assumptions there, because that's so improbable, isn't it?
So improbable.
So, for example, there's the physicist Max Tegmark, who has the mathematical universe hypothesis. And in his book, he was showing that there are 32 dimensionless constants that need to be all finely tuned in order to have the universe that we do have. And I added one other control, the on-off switch, which would be like the trigger of the Big Bang, bringing the total number of constants necessary to govern a universe as at 33, which is kind of, again,
Scott's favorite number.
Talked about that, how 33 is, it represents the full range. And it's fascinating to me that in physics, they've come up with 33 constants. It reminds me that if you about the periodic table of the elements, when you actually lay that all out, normally if you look at that table, there's a couple of little charts at the bottom for the lanthanides and actinides, and if you actually put them all together, the chart is quite wide, but it has 32 columns. And there's a philosopher, Mike Hockney, who talks about adding a 0th element to the chart, which would be light, because light is sort of the basis of all the elements, and that would be like the 33rd column. So again, if you look at elements, it requires 33 different kinds of elements to have a universe. And so for me, that's it's kind of a tip of the hat for like a signature of consciousness there, you know, like, oh yeah, the full range is going to end up being 33. You know?
And you know what, speaking about like the tip of the hat, Scott, you know, because this is kind of like gets straight to the core of like why I'm so passionate about sacred geometry in the first place, you know, is that as I've sort of allowed sacred geometry take me places where I've sort of brushed up against certain insights that I've had, you know, like even, you know, reading your book, and you make a beautiful point about if the electron, you know, in an atom was like even just a tiny bit lighter, it would have never been able to kind of like hold its form in whatever distance from the nucleus of an atom.
Well, let me read a little bit heavier. The best way, Geoff, might be just to read the part of this quote from Tegmark that speaks right to that, and it's very accurate.
Okay, please, so, that would be great.
Yeah, if electrons were much lighter, there could be no stable stars. And if they were much heavier, there could be no ordered structures such as crystals and DNA molecules. If protons were just 0.2% heavier, they would decay into neutrons, unable to hold on to their own electrons. So there would be no atoms. If they were instead much lighter, then neutrons inside of the atoms would decay into protons. So there would be no stable atoms except for hydrogen. Indeed, the proton mass depends on another knob that has a very wide range of variation and needs to be fine-tuned to 33 decimal places to get any stable atoms other than hydrogen. Now there's the 33 again.
Yeah, I know, it's cool.
I mean, how
That's
many
so
times
cool.
do we come across this?
It does follow you around,
phenomenon
Scott,
until we start recognizing a pattern.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I'm with you on the 33 thing.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
You know, how fast do you have to go to leave this planet? You have to go Mach 33 to leave the gravity well of Earth.
Yeah.
33 times the speed of sound.
Yeah.
Not 32. You know?
And by the way, isn't the runway in Fort Lauderdale in NASA as well, like 33 degrees or something? It's angled at 33 degrees or at 33 longitude.
The runway right next to the launch complexes where SpaceX is using them now, but it used to be the Apollo missions left from there.
Yeah.
So very historic. It's runway 33. And it's because the coastline is 33 degrees with respect to north.
Okay.
So it just parallels the coastline. So it's not really a conspiracy of Freemasons to orient the runway as such, but it's a deeper conspiracy of the coastline being
at 33 degrees.
You know?
Yeah. That is
whatever
funny.
all those coincidences and synchronicities that happened to determine that location as the place where we were going to have this connection between earth and heaven.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's actually incredible. But just, do you want to finish that quote there? Because you mentioned some interesting people there as well, you know? I mean,
sure. Where was I? Let's see. Here it is. Many of these fine-tuning examples were discovered in the 70s and 80s by Paul Davies, Brandon Carter, Bernard Carr, Martin Rees, John Barrow, Frank Tipler, Steven Weinberg, and other physicists. And more examples just kept turning up. So that's the end of Max Tegmark's quote. And I've read books by several of those people and really had my mind opened about the unlikelihood of all of these things being so finely tuned. And it reminds me of another kind of radical book in a different genre that I read called Who Built the Moon? And in that book, the authors kind of point out all of these constants related to the moon, which are just too perfect and crazy. And so they actually thought it was a manufactured satellite. And I don't buy into that. I think that's very far-fetched. But what they were tuning into was this improbable set of constants governing the moon. And I found that, you know, if you look at the work of John Martineau, who you're going to be talking to in our summit, he's found amazing patterns in the solar system. And, you know, so this so-called conspiracy goes far beyond just the moon. It's all the planets, and it's so many different things from all through these different scales. And so that was my impetus for writing this particular chapter, was to kind of go through the scales and point out some of these amazing improbabilities that to me seem like it's a signature of consciousness underlying
I'm kind of holding myself back a little bit, Scott, because I kind of want you to lay out, you know, the constants, the fine tuning, and what I think maybe at the end of this chapter, I'll let myself go into, you know, ultimately, like, what does this mean then? You know, what does this mean for us, for people that are interested in this, for people who have the eyes to see the signs that our universe is so finely tuned? And, you know, just like spoiler for the end of the chapter, essentially, like, this feeds in very, very beautifully into this sort of sense that the universe is kind of this interconnected whole, you know, and that, like, this sort of feeling of interconnectedness is imbued with a certain intelligence, an intelligence that's way bigger than little me for certain, you know. And when you begin to sort of get these endorsements or confirmations that, like, this is also a remarkable, improbable scenario this is improbable, this is improbable, this is highly unlikely, and all these kind of line up. It actually boggles your mind. And then what happens is you begin to sort of open to, wow, like there really does seem to be something that's like intelligently creating with a sort of intent, is what it feels like, you know. And that then leads to quite a radical shift in how you are in your world, you know, and how you see the world. And then that's just kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy then, because the more you see it, the more you feel it, the more you feel it, the more you see it, you know. And I know we made our caveats in the other chapters about you have to always be careful that you're not like using confirmation bias or being trapped by patternicity. But you see, what I love about this chapter is, as you lay it out like this, you know, let's just go into like the stars, the planets, you know, all the way through. Well, and it'll just become apparent to the listener, the viewer, how cool this is.
There's something to be on guard for about confirmation bias. But on the other hand, if you were in the 17th century and you were coming up with trying to find out the relationship between temperature and pressure in a piston, and you notice that when you compress the piston, it seems to get more pressure and hotter. And so you keep doing this, and you could say, well, you're just cherry picking these examples of moving the piston and measuring it, aren't you? But what you're doing is you're finding a bunch of conditions that seem to repeat and form a pattern. And you're noticing that pattern, and then from that you theorize and come up with a mathematical relationship between temperature and pressure and volume, you see? And then we respect that. It's a mathematical law, you know, Boyle's law or something. And we don't then look at that and say, well, you were just cherry picking. You were just, you know, randomly looking at these things that happened in your lab. And, you know, I think it's just kind of a way of disparaging someone who's collected evidence through their senses and come up with a theory about that explains what's happening. And if you don't go with that, you're just going to write it off as being apophenia or pareidolia, confirmation bias, you know. But actually, wait a minute. How many 33s do you have to see that represent the full range until you can start to theorize that the 33 somehow is this master number that represents the full range in all different phenomena, you know? But, you know, am I just cherry picking? I don't know, but I've seen it so many times that I'm theorizing about that, you know?
Well, I think we can step out a bit more confidently than that, Scott. And I know we do. It's like, you know, the cherry picking thing just kind of comes to us because when people criticize our point of view, very often the first stone they'll throw, and by the way, it's a welcome stone. We love when people call us out for cherry picking. But I think what we're really offering with our school, with Sacred Geometry Academy, is that we've broken through those criticisms, and we're like, yeah, fair point. I once taught like that, but actually, to be honest with you, having gone through, you know, pattern after pattern after pattern and being awoken to this incredible, sophisticated way that reality is made up, I actually don't believe we're cherry picking anymore. You know, that's kind of like, I think it's important to put our mark on the wall in that regard, you know, and say, you know, I'm sure we maybe might pick a bogey example from time to time, you know, not that I know of one we have, by the way, but I'm sure it's going to happen, you know, but the general intuitions that we have now backed up by things like the fine tuning, it just becomes very compelling, you know. And so my hope is that our viewers and listeners here will begin to feel it for themselves, you know, where they kind of go, really? Wow, seriously? And just it keeps coming, and then it keeps stacking. Each insight stacks on itself till you sort of, you don't even need to convince people of this. You just kind of say, check this out, isn't this cool? Check this out, isn't this cool?
Yeah, and I think that the materialist worldview will always exist because it's one way of looking at everything.
Yeah.
And there's no way to eliminate that. And it may, in fact, be a stepping stone from moving from, you know, the separation that you have from your mother and from others and the the kind of growth cycles that humans go through, it's probably an important step along that path of thinking of everything as separate from yourself. But I think that the next step that we are inviting people to go to is to see how interconnected everything is, and to see that it seems to be governed by a vast intelligence. And in the past, people would attribute that right away to God. I'm kind of skeptical about that, because I don't really want to attribute something, the whole universe and all the beauty and patterns, to some other person, that I can never be, that I can never experience. It's their thing, I think it's more, well, how do you feel about that, Geoff? If you participate in kind of being God, in the sense of being awareness.
I really liked, I really felt like we had a bit of a breakthrough in our last chat, where we were talking about, like, it's kind of funny where we fit in here, because if you have a look at what we're kind of talking about here, we're really, really into science, actually. We're talking about patterns, scientific patterns here. You're talking about the weight of an electron in an atom. That floats our boat, and the point we're making here, if it was like a little bit heavier, all matter would have condensed, and there wouldn't have been atoms to everything would have just imploded, I think, back in.
Or there'd only be hydrogen and nothing.
Or there'd only be hydrogen.
Yeah.
And so like, but the point I'm trying to make is, we kind of adopt scientific insights and get blown away by them, right? But then we also like adopt a kind of a spiritual stance of a sort. I certainly do, where I'm like, wow, this is so amazing, so incredible, so intricate, so sophisticated, so intelligent, that like there's this enormously wonderful kind of creative force that binds the whole dance of the cosmos together. I often say we're woven into that as individuals, and we can experience it, And so we do have a lot in common with the God Brigade, even though I don't feel comfortable saying like I'm a religious person. I've sort of a lapsed Catholic in a friendly sense, if that makes sense, But I definitely share a kind of an awe and a reverence for the universe, which is very, very similar to spiritual people or religious people, So it's almost like we nearly have a foot in both camps, but don't belong fully to either.
Yeah, to use Ken Wilber's thought, it's kind of like we transcend and yet still include science and religion in this larger framework. And that's a radical move. That's very different. Then science and religion are kind of at odds with each other in many regards, and they relegate each other to different domains. Like the science is what you can weigh and measure, and spirituality is what you can't.
But you were just saying about Ken Wilber transcending and including, which I totally agree with.
I think that's what our framework is doing, rather than just obviating the previous way of looking and saying that's invalid and our way is the right way. We're actually not saying that. We're saying religion and science are appropriate to the areas in which they're looking, but we're trying to kind of synthesize those two ways of looking into a larger whole.
Could I add something to this? Just this rant, I suppose, now that I'm on it, just to finish it off. But I did like the way we caught, our reverence for science, because like a lot of the sort of the left brain insights, they come directly from science, like how atoms are made, how the universe is patterned, how the solar system moves, how our bodies are configured. They're all scientific findings, right? Blow our minds, essentially. And then it opens us up to this feeling that there's something bigger than ourselves, some grand intelligence, which is kind of like a spiritual disposition. And I'm at home in both those worlds, yet I definitely don't feel I'm a scientist, that's for sure. And I'm definitely not qualified as one. So, no claim there. But I also just don't feel at home in any kind of formal religious group either, Now, a couple of things, though, I would like to say is that staying in the middle of this stream, if you like, right, has done a couple of significant things for me. And one is that, like, for me, I suppose it's left me at home with just celebrating the mystery. To me, it's a mystery. That's the first thing, There's an additional kind of bead on that rope as well, is that, like, I've began to discover that my own preference for interacting with the mystery is through experience. You know, I feel that like when I get lifted up into a place that brings me out of my everyday and I actually get to experience whatever that mystery is bigger than myself, that it's what I long for. Actually, it's like it's the source of all my happiness. It's where my contentment comes from. And so these principles are important, you know, this idea of like it's a mystery. I love to experience that mystery. And I'm sort of surrendered then to being okay with not knowing stuff as well, you know, where sometimes I find on the science side, there's a little bit of a claim to certainty, which leaves me a little bit uncomfortable. And then sometimes on the religious side, there's a different type of claim, but it also does try to close things into certainty. And for me, I don't know, I feel more comfortable with, I have no idea what's going on. It's pretty cool from where I'm looking at it. And I feel privileged that we get to experience it. So come on, you know, I'm like, that kind of places me, actually. I feel good when I say it like that, because it's almost like we've carved our own groove in a way.
I think we're following in the footsteps of Socrates in that he was the first to say, I don't really know shit.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
And I'd like to know, let's talk about it and work it out.
Yeah.
You can, but I really don't claim to know anything, you know?
You got it. Yeah, yeah. Is he the dude? Was his quote, I know that I don't know.
Yeah, and he was considered to be the
yeah.
wisest man by the oracle.
Yeah.
Because he admitted that he doesn't really know anything. And I think that the smartest people, the smartest physicists know that they don't know. They know that they don't really understand what light is. They don't really understand what charge is. They don't really understand gravitation. And yet all the theories are built on these things.
Yeah.
But at the end, it's kind of like pi. Like we don't really understand pi.
We don't.
But we just at the end of the day, to live our lives, we just call it something. We'll call that thing pi, and we'll move on. You know?
Yeah.
And that's
but there's a couple of cool things happen with, like, as the more you can become comfortable with not knowing, right? Two things happen, right? One is, it's a little bit humbling, which is nice. You know, it's just like, you're not like, oh, I know the answer, you know, so you tend to be a bit more easygoing about things. But there's something much more significant as well, is that when you truly are okay with not knowing stuff, you enter into a headspace where you actually genuinely become open to new information. Where if I was wearing my blinkers of certainty, I'm not going to see this thing out here at the sort of the circumference of my consciousness, you know. And I really feel this, you know, that it's pi. We're not meant to have completed pi and resolved it, you know. It's meant to be a mystery that's unresolved, that will always be uncertain for us, because that does something to us, and that thing it does to us is so valuable, you know.
But I think there's an important distinction to be made about being an ignorant person and being comfortable with ignorance, which is like you're kind of at like near the center of a circle inside of it. But if you strive to kind of transcend your boundary and move your locus of consciousness to the boundary edge, and you realize that you can never really know, and you'd like to go beyond that, and that's a different kind of admitting your ignorance. Like, I don't really know, but I've tried everything I can to know.
And will continue trying.
And I will continue, but I'm going to surrender into that not knowing. That's a very different stance than being this unmoving ignoramus at the middle who doesn't even care to learn anything at all.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. What he said. Yeah. I take that as a given. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been coming into this lifetime with this huge seeking urge, you know. It's like every day I spend seeking, you know what I mean? And that's kind of part of the trip, you know. And then it's like the whole irony of the spiritual trip is you're seeking, you're looking for answers, you know. And then you're sitting on the box that has the treasure inside it, you know, that whole trip, you know, that everything ultimately you seek is within you, you know. But for some reason you have to go out there, and you have to really knock on a lot of doors, and, you know, read a lot of books and go to a lot of workshops to discover I didn't need any of those things. It's a weird irony at play there, but it just seems to be the way the gig is rigged, you know. Anyway, sorry, we're digressing, but sometimes I like our digressions.
I do too.
So look, do you want to jump into stars then, Scott? You know, will we just go through? Yeah.
Down from the scale of the whole universe, we're looking at stars, and I'm kind of taking off from Rupert Sheldrake, honestly, who's the modern thinker who's proposed that stars may very well be conscious, is his idea, because looking at the complexity of the magnetic fields, it's incredibly complicated, on par with the magnetic fields of the human brain. And so he was wondering if stars might be conscious. And so the difference here is that I think that everything there's only consciousness. And so looking for consciousness in the visible world is kind of a fool's errand, because it's not necessary to go find it in the star or in the brain or here or there, because it's all consciousness, right? But this quest of trying to locate consciousness in the physical material world takes essentially two different forms that I point out in this chapter. There's panpsychism and cosmopsychism. So panpsychism is the philosophy that consciousness must have very small building blocks called fields or monads. A lot of times you'll hear this talk, the field, or the Akashic records, or Leibniz had this theory of monads, which were almost like atoms, but they weren't atoms. They were the units of consciousness. And so the idea is when you start to group those units together, you get more consciousness. And so it's this idea that you can have gradations and levels of consciousness. And that very much differs from my philosophy, where the absolute has no limitations, no boundaries, no levels, no distinctions, no merit badges. You see, there's no self-help needed because there is no self. But on this small scale, panpsychism means that consciousness is distributed in these little units that are physical. And then you group them together and you get more and more consciousness. So the sun must be very conscious because it's so large in comparison with us, right? And so that's that theory. But again, it's really just, it's looking for consciousness in materialism. And cosmopsychism is the opposite approach, where you assume that only the whole universe is conscious, and that things that are smaller than the whole universe, like say a galaxy, is less conscious, and a star would be less conscious. And then we must be very, very dim-witted in comparison to a star because we're small, right? But in these theories, there's no real understanding of how that arises and how it subdivides. And I think I don't even really want to analyze it further, because it is such a materialist worldview ultimately to try to find consciousness as this little unit out there in the world separate from you. Yeah. And so
you're kind of, I get it, you're kind of debunking these two materialistic ways of looking at the cosmos, that claim that, consciousness is either like all of the universe and everything smaller than that is less conscious, or the other way around, that bigger things have more consciousness. So the sun is more conscious than you and I, for example. So I get that, but what's your take then on because we're talking about as above, so below, and fine tuning. You say here, even if stars do not have souls, and my guess is that they do, stars are informations of world mind, relative images modulating the screen of consciousness. So what is your take then on stars in terms of what we're talking about here?
Everything is minded. Okay, consciousness is everywhere in the visible world, because the whole visible world is just a dissociation of universal mind, which is fueled by consciousness. And so specifically about stars, it seems very appropriate that they would have a level of consciousness just like you and I do. They would be individuals. They would be aware of their surroundings, and they would have a boundary, which is maybe the whole solar system is their boundary. But I don't know that like I know the contents of my own mind as a human being. I can't tell you that I know the sun's mind, but symmetry suggests that stars are conscious, just like I'm conscious. Okay, but it's a different scale. And so it has a different scope and a different boundary conditions that define its statement of I am the sun, and this must be who I am because I've reached my boundary. And so I can only speculate about what its concerns are, but I would imagine that its concerns would be related to other stars and its relationship to them, and its internal workings, the motion of the planets and so on would probably be on its priority list. But I just see it as a different scale, and so therefore when we see things like the magnetic field complexity of the sun, that is a beautiful thing to notice and to see, wow, it's really complicated, like our brains are really complicated. But it doesn't mean that the consciousness is in the brain. It just means that the brain is a receiver of that information from the invisible domain. It's like, I think I've said earlier, where the brain is like kind of like a TV set. And if you were very primitive, you might think that the actors are inside the TV set, and you'd take apart the circuits and you'd be probing them, and you'd do something, and the picture would be interrupted, and you go, look, there's proof the actors are inside there, and you're like, wait, no, it's just there's one layer of abstraction that you're missing, which is that it's being streamed from Netflix. And then even another layer of abstraction. Well, there was, there were people who were actors on the stage, and that was recorded. And we understand all of that, but when we're too literal about it, we jump to conclusions about, well, it has to be this physical thing. That's where it is. The consciousness must be in little tiny units or in very large units. But that's taking a kind of literalist approach to finding consciousness out there in the world.
I get you.
I think of Kepler because he was the one who wrote the 3 laws that govern planetary motion that we still use today. And it's interesting that Kepler was the one who realized that planetary orbits are ellipses, and that the sun is at one of it's at a focus of the ellipse. There's 2 foci in an ellipse, and the sun is at one of them, and the planets orbit around that in an ellipse. Okay, and so he described that mathematically very beautifully. But he had this intuition that the relationships between the planets must be governed by polyhedra, or perhaps 3-dimensional hedra shapes nested. And he was looking for that, and he made a whole model in the 16th century or early 17th century about.
I love that, the Cosmographicum or something, isn't it? And he had all of the platonic solids, and he was, I love Kepler, by the way. I'm just like, I really absolutely dig that man in a major way,
But I see that Kepler admitted that those explorations that he made didn't pan out, and they didn't match the data, and I think that frustrated him. But and he had that realization in the year 1595 that he thought that 2D polygons with inscribed or circumscribed circles represent the orbits of planets. But it didn't work out because he was the guy who brought us the truth that the planet orbits are elliptical. And so he couldn't really resolve that with regular polygons, which are kind of fitting inside of or a circle or being inscribed within a circle, or being circumscribed or inscribed with a circle. And so it didn't really work with the ellipse thing, and he kind of gave up. But I think John Martineau has shown through his A Little Book of Coincidence in the Solar System that if you just normalize the orbits of the planets by looking at their mean orbits, that is to take their elliptical orbit and take the average of that, or the mean, and make it a circular orbit. And then you do that to all the planets and then compare them. And lo and behold, Kepler's dream is realized with all of these things related by polygons in such a beautiful way. And it's a shame that Kepler didn't have that notion to renormalize the orbits as circular, but maybe he was the wrong guy to do that, seeing that he was the one that brought the ellipses to our attention.
Yeah. And can we just sort of cheerlead John Martineau a little bit, because what has been revealed in his work is essentially these beautiful geometric patterns that emerge from the movement of the planets in the solar system. Venus draws this perfected 5-pointed star around planet Earth every 8 years, every 8 years on planet Earth, which happens to be 13 years on planet Venus. So you have then this 5-pointed star in space, 8 years on Earth, 13 years on Venus, which again are Fibonacci numbers, so that's called a kiss of Venus. And it's one of the greatest examples of beauty in the solar system, courtesy of John Martineau, which is like one of the kind of all-time greatest hits, I suppose, of the sacred geometry trip we're on. But there's a whole host of gorgeous geometric patterns that unfold, relationships between planet Earth and Jupiter, relationship between the moons of Jupiter, relationships between two planets, and they all basically give birth to these beautiful geometric patterns, And the trick there, I think, Scott, if you're right, if I understand you correctly, is that you must take the mean orbits and make them into circles. Doesn't work with ellipses, basically. So there's a little bit of poetic license there, but one that I think is entirely acceptable, because geometry, works on circles.
It's a simplification, one level down, of taking the ellipses and making them circles. But I think that's a fair move, considering that the actual complexity of the solar system is probably higher dimensional, and we're moving in spirals, and our galaxy is moving against other galaxies, and there's all kinds of motions that have more and more and more complexity. But for us to understand it, we really need to simplify it down as much as we can. And then if we can get it on a sheet of paper, a two-dimensional representation, then we start to see these beautiful patterns, and we start to recognize that there's an order there. But these patterns must continue in just with greater levels of complexity that sort of are very difficult for us to perceive as they become 3 and 4 and 5 dimensional. It sort of goes above our pay grade.
Definitely mine, by the way. I'd say you'd have a good go, Scott. I'd like working out some elaborate equations, But like, even when you're talking about, that lovely triangle you saw, and it's in this chapter, actually, I think it's the Kepler triangle, actually. And it has like phi, pi, and E, is it, or I?
No, the Kepler triangle is a right triangle, and it has a base of 1, a height of the square root of phi, and the hypotenuse is phi.
Yeah. So anyway, so that I was kind of muddled.
That triangle, if you put the Earth on the one side, and then you put the Earth and the moon together on the square root of phi side, they fit. I mean,
so cool.
It's such a beautifully simple geometric relationship with a Kepler triangle that encapsulates the size of our planet and the moon together.
I know, and it's
I mean, when you see that and you realize that's like 99.9% accurate, you're like, what?
I know, it's so beautiful. I feel beauty when I see that, And so even when you're talking about the square root of phi, and the base is 1, and then the hypotenuse is phi, my brain kind of goes, huh? But then when I see it as a picture like this, I go, oh my God, I totally get it. Who would have thought that perfection exists in that relationship? You know, it's a bit like with John Martineau's work. When I see the 5-pointed floret that's painted by Venus, I go, are you kidding me? You know, it's like, for some reason, it's the felt imagery of geometry that just makes me go, oh, again.
I know, like if we explain it algebraically and we're like 1 squared plus the square root of 5 squared equals 5 squared, and you're like,
there's not a chance,
okay, that's lovely, but it doesn't move me at all, you know. That's why geometry has such a way. I think it's because we're very visual creatures, and we have a lot of information processing in our visual centers. And when we see that, there's certain resonances that are set up in our brains, and we go, oh my God, the golden ratio. Your brain is like, ding, 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 golden ratio, that's beautiful. You know?
And it happens naturally. You don't even have to make an effort, you know. 5-pointed star, ding, 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 beautiful, gorgeous, you know. Anyway,
and that's why a picture is worth 1,000 words. And even if you read the 1,000 words, it doesn't even compare to the picture, because the picture it carries the energy of it to you.
Hey, we have another example here, just while we're on planets and we're talking about John Martineau, who's like, I suppose he's like the luminary of like patterns in the solar system, amongst a whole host of other things. But I think the work that really floated my boat initially with John was these patterns he revealed in the solar system. But you have another one here, the 15-pointed star. Do you want to talk about that one, Scott?
Yeah, so I learned about this from John Martineau. And so if you imagine constructing a 15-pointed star, and then there's a circle on the outside that touches all the pointy tips, and then there's a circle on the inside where all the star comes together in the middle there. And if you compare the diameters of those two circles, there are 2 resonances that are set up between the Earth and Saturn, and they're simultaneous. So if the small circle represents the size of Earth, then the large circle represents the size of Saturn. 99.8% accurate. That's pretty amazing, right? The size of our Earth compared to Saturn is given by...
And our planets are spheres, more or less. So that isn't, you're not really doing the elliptic license there. You're kind of going...
Well, in a way I am, because you're normalizing the Earth bulges at the equator.
Yeah, but it's much more fractional, isn't it, compared to the orbit?
And Saturn does too. So if we take the mean diameters of Earth and Saturn, then they fit this beautiful relationship, 99.8%.
Understood.
And also, at the same time, if the inner circle represents Earth's orbit around the sun, then the outer circle would be the size of Saturn's orbit around the sun.
So cool.
So you get that? It's a different phenomenon entirely, and yet it has the same geometric relationship with Earth and Saturn. It's just how those two things are the same geometrically is mind-blowing in itself.
I know. And you know, the same happens with the 5-pointed star then as well. You get like the relative size, I think is it the relative size of Earth and the relative size of Mercury, I think, through the 5-pointed star.
I'd have to crack open a little book of coincidence and see.
Yeah, but it's so rich. I mean, basically, this is a recommendation chapter on John's book, Little Book of Coincidence, because it's so rich. You know,
so that's a gateway drug to the solar system. and you're going to love. There's another book by Hartmut Worm, who wrote a book about the solar system that's very good too. But another thing that we people do all the time that deals with the solar system is astrology, right? And I pointed out in this chapter that astrology is actually entirely geometric, because it's looking at the planets in their relationships to each other at the moment of your birth. And those relationships can either be a conjunction, which means they're essentially together, an opposition, which is like a line, a trine forms an equilateral triangle, a square is a square, a quincunx is a pentagon, and a sextile relationship is a hexagon. And so they've come up with these fancy terms to indicate the aspects or relationships between the planets, but they're really just different geometries, triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon.
I like the way you say that, actually. Yeah, I mean, I kind of knew that, but it's nice to hear it called out loud like that, because it's astrology is based on geometry in that way. Of course it is.
And each geometry has a different quality to it. And so when the different aspects of your personality or have that geometric relationship, then they're either harmonious or they have friction, or they have different qualities that are based on those shapes.
Makes complete sense.
And so by the principle of as above, so below, the things that are going on in the solar system are really a macrocosm of what's going on Earth. And what's going on Earth is a macrocosm of what's going on in your life in some way. And so in this fractal way, we are connected with the motions of the planets. But to look for the cause of that in the physical world is a fool's errand, because it's not to be found there. It's connected. What connects those is consciousness. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's why astrology works. It's because it's something that we're tapping into in the greater mind of the solar system. And we're trying to kind of look in our own microcosm and see how that relates to the larger picture. And I think that's a fair move when you understand as above, so below is such a guiding principle of the entire universe, and the hierarchy of souls and the visible world are all guided by that principle.
It's a hermetic principle as well.
And so therefore, astrology has a basis in consciousness. Was it Richard Tarnas who wrote that wonderful book, Cosmos and Psyche, that gets into such an eloquent.
He's amazing, by the way, as a writer.
I'd say read the first 100 pages and it'll just blow your mind about the case for astrology, not just being woo-woo, but he is so much, he can explain it so much better than I can about why that makes sense,
archetypal astrology. I'm convinced. I'm all in on that archetypal astrology stuff.
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of Richard Tarnas as well.
So then moving on, I think we should probably call this a session, and then we will.
Yeah, because I'm kind of like
time.
The way, looking back, we're so far into Reality Atlas now. Scott and I have had a chance to kind of look back over the videos, and we're kind of realizing, a nice kind of time window is about like 40 minutes, 45 minutes is a good kind of bite size video length, and in the next video then we'll talk about cities, architecture, the human body. I love you do the whole visible universe, human scale, right down to the atomic scale, cells, atoms. Wow, this is a big chapter. And quarks.
And I mean, the reason I've done this is to show that these patterns work at every scale.
Yeah.
And that as above, so below is so important in understanding all of the layers of the onion.
It is.
Because they're all patterned in essentially the same way in some regard. They're all guided by intelligence and consciousness. And I just think it's very entertaining and wonderful to revel at each scale in the majesty and wonder of these patterns.
This is where the juice is, Scott. This is where it just gets like awesome, in my opinion. Like, I love it. I love all of the ways these patterns pervade everything at every level. So listen, until video 2, where we'll start with cities, we'll sign off for now, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.